Hey, what's going on guys? It's your boy, NerdModeOn, and welcome to a Star Wars Battlefront video, and today we're actually going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly from the Battlefront beta. So of course, we're only going to be talking about the stuff that pertains currently to the beta, and unfortunately I'll probably miss a couple of things, so of course feel free to let me know in the comments below if there's anything I missed or any frustrations that you guys personally have with the beta. But of course, with that said, let's jump right into the good information when it comes down to what the Battlefront 3 beta has done good so far, so of course let's jump right into it. Battle pickups have deterred players from waiting in the spawn screen / deployment areas for vehicles. As a result of this, they add an interactive element to the battlefield. You see players constantly jumping on objectives, and people aren't just waiting and not playing the game. The sound design and graphics are absolutely insane. I was actually blown out of my mind when I first witnessed what this game actually looks like. Granted, we're only looking at 2 of the maps and the other ones could be lackluster, however, I highly doubt that that will be the case. Now, one of the main reasons that the sound design and graphics are so good, just in case you guys are not familiar, is that DICE actually used the actual models that were used in the films, as well as they actually took a lot of the sound design that was already created and implemented it into the game. As a result of this, DICE didn't have to go in and make any alterations and didn't have to build everything from the ground up. A lot of the times when they do that, they don't necessarily put in the most high quality work, and that's mainly due to time restraints, money restraints, and a lot of other things. But of course, if you look at the game currently, there's no way that you can say it does not look absolutely insane, and it definitely puts you in the Star Wars universe when it comes down to it. Now, of course, considering that we are talking about a DICE game, a lot of people will talk about the performance. Is the performance up to snuff when it comes down to it, or is it another stinker when it comes down to what DICE and EA is known for? I'm happy to say that the performance on the PC, at least, I'm not too sure on the consoles, but I haven't heard any negative reviews come out, especially when it comes down to the performance of those, but I'm happy to say that the performance on the PC is absolutely perfect. There has been 0 problems on my behalf. I'm currently able to play Battlefront on complete ultra settings with everything racked all the way up, as well as I am achieving 200 plus frames per second with little to no dips at all. So of course, with that said, that is definitely a very good thing, especially when it comes down to the reputation of trying to redeem DICE when it comes down to the flop of Battlefield 4 in terms of performance. So it looks like the driver update that was initiated about a week ago definitely really saved the game in terms of that, and it looks like DICE also went in there and optimized a lot of things to make it function really well on a higher end rig. However, I'm not too sure on the lower ones, but again, I haven't really read anything that would claim otherwise. Now, of course, this is something that's very little, but it's definitely something that makes a big difference in comparison to some of its other titles that DICE have created. If you look at Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, one of the biggest things was screen shake. Battlefield 4 definitely brought this to a whole new level of screen shake capabilities. If any of you guys are familiar with the Battlefield franchise, which I'm sure many of you guys are, those particular titles definitely suffered from screen shake from explosions. But of course, if you take a look at Battlefront, I definitely don't see screen shaking being an issue. I've been playing a lot and I have about 12 hours played so far, so of course I haven't really noticed any moments where I'm like, this is unbearable or this is game breaking. There is a little bit of screen shake, but it's by no means even close to what the Battlefield franchise does. Now, of course, one of the things that I personally find really redeeming is that third person stays true to the original games. If you guys are not familiar, Battlefront 1 and 2 are the originals that were really old, especially when it comes down to the PlayStation 2 and some of the other platforms that it was available on. Now, of course, this is not really Battlefront 3 by any means. This is actually a reboot of the franchise, so of course, hopefully we'll be seeing some more games in the near future, but of course, as of the moment, this is the first iteration of the reboot. The cinematic battles in the background add a lot to the game. They make you feel like you're actually fighting a larger battle than the one that you're currently enveloped in. This is definitely something that's really nice, especially for putting you in the element, especially when it comes down to it. It doesn't feel like you're playing a video game necessarily, because it really looks at it from a whole perspective and allows you to really look at the game and go, wow, I'm fighting this great battle and I'm actually making a difference in terms of who's going to win. I would say that this is an issue that a lot of other games really struggle with, considering that it always seems like you're fighting in this random location in the middle of the desert and there's nothing going on to your left and nothing going on to your right. So a lot of the times you feel like it's just kind of a waste of time and it doesn't necessarily bring the whole scope of the battle, especially when it comes down to it, and it feels like you're not making a difference on the battlefield. But of course, this is not an issue in Battlefront. It definitely allows you to become a part of the battle and feel like you're making a difference, which is definitely nice in terms of interactive capabilities for the battlefield, as well as just kind of allowing the Star Wars universe to continue to grow. Now, one of the really exciting characteristics that I'm really looking forward to is character customization. Hopefully this isn't going to be limited by any stretch of the imagination, but of course, as of the moment, we don't have a whole lot of information on this feature. But just in the general scope of it, I definitely look forward to going in there and making my character more like me, and definitely adding a little bit when it comes down to it, so hopefully they'll have a good variety there when it comes down to the full release. The game modes are creative and they make sense in the Star Wars universe. This is something that's very important. You wouldn't want to have random game modes from the Battlefield franchise come into Battlefront, considering that they necessarily wouldn't always make sense. But of course, if you're just looking at the game modes that are currently permitted in the Battlefront beta, then of course they all make sense in terms of the Star Wars universe, and they follow that very nicely. It's definitely nice to see them taking some of the hints from the movies and implementing them into the final release of the game. Now, of course, this wouldn't be a complete video without talking about the heroes, considering that they are extremely powerful in the beta as of the moment, and they're actually really fun to use. There's never a time where you're like, this is kind of the same as the other character, or it's not as fun as other previous titles. So of course the two heroes that we currently have in the beta are Luke and Darth Vader, so of course they're definitely very different from each other and they play very different, especially when it comes down to how you go about using them. But in terms of just overall, I feel like the heroes are definitely a great addition to the game and they really add a lot when it comes down to making the initiative pushes onto the objectives. The active reload system is actually really unique and I find it to be very enjoyable when it comes down to it. It's kind of borrowed from the Gears of War franchise, which if you guys are familiar with that kind of has the similar kind of system that's currently going on in Battlefront. Now, with the weapons in Battlefront being lasers, it wouldn't necessarily make any sense to have those particular weapons needing the requirements for magazines. So of course a great substitute would to have the weapon overheat, which is definitely a mechanic that we don't usually see in a lot of games, considering that the more common thing right now is military shooters present or a little bit in the future, but not too crazy too far into the future. So of course this system allows the skillful players to hit the yellow indicator when prompted to do so, which allows them to bypass the overheat mechanic in the game. And last but not least, I really found the regenerating of health to be almost instantaneous in most cases. However, of course, once you've taken a little bit of damage, there is about a 3 to 5 second delay before you kind of regenerate all the way back up to 100%. I really enjoy this mechanic considering that it doesn't require medical bags from the Battlefield franchise. However, I'm not too sure if they'll go back to the medical stations like in the previous iterations of the Battlefront series. Now, transferring over to the bad information when it comes down to the Battlefront beta. Thermal detonators tend to damage players through cover, which is basically like hard cover like a wall or even a rock in many cases, and I noticed that I was taking a lot of damage even if I was completely secured by these obstacles. So of course I'm not exactly for sure if this is a design decision to kind of deter players from standing behind cover, but of course it's kind of weird at the moment where you're still taking damage even if you're behind a wall that can't be destroyed in the first place. Heroes' hit detection is absolutely horrible at the moment. They'll swipe a lot of the times with their lightsaber and they'll clearly miss you on your screen, however they'll still be granted the kill. This is definitely very frustrating alongside with the ability for them to commando lunge ungodly distances a lot of the time. Now of course I am well aware that Luke does have a feature that allows him to do this, so of course that does make a lot of sense when it comes down to it. However, I've noticed that it's very inconsistent in many cases, and sometimes he'll leap only a little bit of distance, and then other times he'll leap literally a mile across the map and just kind of swipe you one time. So of course it looks like they need to kind of go in there and figure out what the proper distance would be in many cases, and make some alterations definitely when it comes down to it. So as of the moment it looks like their hit detection is pretty dodgy for the most part, and it's frustrating by itself. Now, of course, hit detection for infantry combat seems to be pretty good for the most part. I don't necessarily have a whole lot of issues with it. I feel like it's perfect at the moment, but of course there is always room for improvement. Currently, the refresh rates on the servers is only 30 Hz, which is definitely not ideal for most cases if you want your game to be moderately competitive or at least have an enjoyable experience for most players. For any of you guys familiar, the Battlefield 4 is going to have a new current standard of 60 or even higher in many cases, so of course 30 is kind of the old standard for what Battlefield 4 was previously running on. Cards recharge way too quickly at the moment. The grenade spam is absolutely insane in most cases, and it's really easy. I mean, 9 seconds is not a whole lot of time. By the time you throw your grenade and it blows up and you kill a couple of infantry, you have another grenade at your disposal. Alongside that, I feel like a lot of the other cards just recharge a little bit too quickly. For the most part, this is in reference to the thermal detonators in specific, so of course I would really like them to add about 3 to 5 seconds more, considering that I feel like that would decrease the spamming of grenades a lot more on the battlefield, which is definitely always a good thing when it comes down to it. Now, of course, in terms of a few animation glitches, the cape on Darth Vader and the Imperial soldiers tends to randomly flop up and down while moving or even walking, or sometimes not even when moving at all, so of course it looks like they do have a few animation glitches currently at the moment. Another thing for some of you air combat users, I noticed that a lot of the times by the time that you're going through the animation to actually enter the airspace, a lot of the times you'll just be getting shot at before you actually have control of the vehicle. So of course I feel like the game needs to have some sort of anti-air in the spawn to kind of deter players from doing this, or if they're not really willing to do that, then allow the players to be out of bounds and then come inbound. That way players can't be shooting them when they spawn in. One of the biggest gripes that I currently have with trying to get into the games, especially when it comes down to playing with friends, is that parties should have their own colors in game instead of having everyone turn up as blue and then only having one of your friends turn up as a yellow dot. I feel like that's very frustrating for making team coordinations, for trying to push onto objectives, and overall just trying to play the game with your friends. I mean, it's always a lot more enjoyable when you can see 5 of your buddies pushing onto an objective. But of course, at the moment, you only really see your squad mate at the current moment, which is definitely not great, especially when it comes down to limiting the amount of players that you can currently play with, as well as when you do get onto an objective, it can be hard to tell who exactly is with you, because you have to constantly look at people's nameplates, which are really not that easy to see on Hoth by itself. Now, of course, we're going to be talking a little bit about visibility. Well, of course, we just talked about it previously with the nameplates and the overall HUD when it comes down to it, but this is a little bit more in reference to the power-ups that are located on the map. As of the moment, they're really hard to see, especially considering that they're light blue / dark blue for the most part, and they don't necessarily have any outline that would really make them stand out. This is especially obvious on Hoth, considering that the entire map is pretty much black and white, which really makes them really hard to see for some particular reason, and also they're just not really easily noticeable. The HUD is a little obstructive. I know a lot of people have really been complaining about this, and necessarily I don't completely agree with all of their complaints, but for the most part there are some little things that I feel like should be adjusted when the final game does come out. For any particular reason, if DICE is not willing to want to rearrange the cards to make them slightly smaller, or some of the achievements that pop up on screen and really block your entire view, especially in the middle of the screen, I feel like they should then add the HUD transparency option from Battlefield 4. This would allow people to drop that all the way down to 0, or just kind of rearrange some stuff, considering that at times it can be really hard to track your target if there's a lot of HUD icons that are blocking the visibility. Now, of course, as of the moment, especially when it comes down to the beta, there is absolutely no reason to play in first person. It gives you absolutely no advantage in terms of any particular reason, so of course they need to either decide to make first person its own game mode, or add particular advantages that third person doesn't have. So of course, hopefully they won't go too extreme with the advantages, but there needs to be something done for those first person players. The AT-ST and the AT-AT third-person cannons / weapons are not aligned correctly. For some reason, even if you're looking at the target, you can also miss them, which doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of reason at long range. Now, the main reason it doesn't necessarily make sense is because we're shooting lasers. We're not shooting projectiles that have a tendency to drop due to gravity. So of course they definitely need to go in there and make some alterations to that. Maybe even having a first person mode for the AT-ST and the AT-AT would be really cool, and I feel like a lot of fans would really like to have that first person element in those particular vehicles. A very interesting design decision, especially when it comes down to the audio for the heroes, is a lot of the times they'll say lines that don't necessarily make sense to their character, and a lot of the times Darth Vader just sounds completely different from the movies. Now, of course, I know it's probably a completely different voice actor. However, he just kind of says things that are a little bit different, and you don't necessarily always know it's Darth Vader talking, so of course they might want to go in there and add a little bit of bass or do something a little different to his voice. Now, of course, this is not all of the lines that Darth Vader says and Luke says, but of course there are a couple of lines that I'm sure you guys have probably heard and went, who is saying that, or why are they saying this? This doesn't necessarily make sense to their character. Another really big issue is that Imperials can use the Rebel turrets. Now, of course, I've been really enjoying playing as the Imperials and jumping into the turrets, considering that the Rebels don't really have a chance to blow you up, so of course you can go on these massive kill streaks without really any contest from the opposition. However, since the Rebels don't necessarily have any ground vehicles, this is definitely something that DICE needs to go in there and make a little bit correction to, considering that it doesn't make sense for the Imperials to be able to jump in them and automatically know how to use them when it comes down to it. As of the current moment, there is absolutely no advanced sensitivity options. Now, this is mainly in reference to Battlefield 4, considering that in Battlefield 4 they added the ability for you to have different hipfire as well as ADS sensitivities. I think this would be a really great unique feature, especially for Battlefront, considering that they're allowing players to use snipers, which would be the cycle rifle, as well as a lot of the weapons tend to have ADS capabilities in the first place. So of course, continuing on with the sensitivity discussion, vehicles and turrets also need to have a little bit better sensitivity options, considering that they're really wonky at the moment. As of the moment, there seems to not be a happy medium between going too fast and also going too slow. No matter how much you go into the settings and make alterations to the game files as well as your DPI if you're playing on PC, it doesn't really seem to make a difference considering that there's just not a good medium when it comes down to it, and I feel like they need to go in there and make some alterations to the ADS mode considering that that seems to be the biggest problem when it comes down to the sensitivity. The kill feed also needs to be moved. Currently it's in the right middle of the screen, which is absolutely the most ridiculous spot to have the kill feed in the first place. So of course they need to go in there and either change it to the top right or the top left. There's really no other option that they can go with considering that this is the universal standard, so of course they need to continue to go with the universal standard when it comes down to FPS and third-person shooters. In-game achievements / battle pickups need to be smaller and out of the middle of the screen when they're activated / picked up. As of the moment, if you pick one up, it just blasts you right in the face in the middle of the screen, blocking your aiming down sight accuracy as well as your vehicle accuracy. So of course they definitely need to do something about this. I don't know if they want to move it to the top left, just right below the kill feed, and just have a little indicator that says you pick something up, or if they want to do anything else, but as of the moment it's unacceptable to have it where it currently is, considering that it blocks your ability to see players and even shoot players in many cases. So this is something that they definitely need to be looking into and changing as soon as possible. And last but not least, let's quickly talk about the ugly. I only have a few bulletin points here, so of course I'm sure I'm missing a lot of information that you guys deem to be the ugly part of Battlefront, so of course feel free to let me know in the comments below. As of the moment, there is no server browser. This is absolutely ridiculous considering that this game absolutely needs a server browser in the first place to make it enjoyable for you to be able to play with your friends as well as do a lot of other things that server browsers permit. The spawn points are currently horrible when it comes down to the beta. A lot of the times you will literally watch people spawn in front of you with their god mode for just a few seconds. Of course, this is spawn invulnerability. It decreases the ability for these players to get killed while they're loading into the particular game. However, as of the moment, you can kind of just stand there and actually look at their spawn, and they'll continue to spawn there no matter what. It's absolutely broken as of the moment, and I'm sure they'll make alterations and they'll change this a lot, but of course there needs to be some boundaries, especially when it comes down to me being able to get into your spawn, as well as what is considered an acceptable spawn in the Battlefront franchise. Another really big frustrating issue, especially if you would like to play with your friends, which is probably the most important thing when it comes down to gaming in the first place, because it's kind of a really big community, everybody interacts with each other, and having friends is kind of the importance of enjoying a particular game. As of the moment, you do not have the ability to switch teams. I'm not sure why this feature is not in the beta or even probably won't even be in the full release. I'm hoping that it will be, but I know a lot of the times people really are against this feature for switching to the winning team. So of course the biggest solution that I can give is allow people 1 minute at the beginning of the game to switch teams, that way they can get onto their friend's team if they solely desire. This is really the only solution that I can think of that won't necessarily enrage the community and will also allow people to play with their friends. And last but not least, something that's not really too big of a deal to me personally, but I know the community has really been not too happy about this, especially considering that DICE is making the game. From the articles that I've been reading, as well as some interviews done by DICE employees, it does not look like there will be any weapon customization in the game. Now, of course, we did talk about how you will have the ability to customize your character and your cards a little bit, but of course, by no means does that permit the ability to do a little bit of customization on your weapon. This is definitely something that I feel like DICE should have really pushed for. This is definitely a feature that the Rebels would have available to them. They would definitely be experimenting with a lot of great things, and I'm sure there's a lot of books that have talked about the experimentation of weapons for the Rebel Alliance. However, for some particular reason, DICE is deciding to scrap this entire idea and just go with the standard utensils, especially when it comes down to the weapons that the Rebels would commonly have associated in their armory. And I really feel like this is a big loss when it comes down to the ability to advertise your game, considering that that kind of limits you in terms of advertisements as well as the longevity of the title by itself. But anyway guys, that's really all the information I have for my review on the Battlefront beta. I've definitely been having a lot of fun, and I'll have a video talking about my experiences and how I feel about the beta by itself when it comes down to my own personal beliefs. However, I felt like this would be some good information for you guys to kind of chime in and give some general opinions on what you feel like is bad about the beta, what you really found enjoyable about it, what's ugly about the beta by itself. And overall, hopefully as a community, we can kind of get a general consensus of what we really enjoy and hopefully what we want to see improved in the future. But anyway guys, until the next episode, this has been NMO, and I'm going to be signing out guys. Peace.